You're with Newsday. As we've been reporting, the annual rate of inflation in Australia has risen to 6.1% from 5.1%. It is now the highest level we've seen in 3 decades. Australian families are being warned inflationary pressures could persist for the next 18 months as supermarket supply chains pass on increased input costs to consumers. Let's bring in Tanya Barden, the CEO of the Australian Food and Grocery Council. Tanya, really appreciate your time. Thank you. I assume you're not surprised to see inflation lifting a full percentage point today.
Yeah, I'm actually surprised it's not higher. What I'm actually seeing in the market talking to businesses is that they're still under significant strain with a lot of costs coming down the line. So I think that there is still time before some of that hits the shelves in the supermarkets and out in restaurants and so on.
That's probably not what most of us would like to be hearing, Tanya. Which items in particular are you talking about? Which ones have skyrocketed in terms of which foods are really a lot more expensive now?
So some of the big impacts we've seen have been in things like vegetables, and no doubt we've had the domestic flooding which has impacted on fresh fruit and vegetable prices. They've risen by 14.6% over the last year. There's also been a 14% increase in oils and fats, and that's partly driven by what we're seeing in the Ukrainian war, because they are a big supplier of, for example, sunflower oil, and that has risen significantly in global pricing. But across the board, we're seeing big increases that are coming through on costs, everything to do with energy, ingredients, packaging, transport fuels, everything to do with making and distributing food and grocery products has gone up significantly in price. And as I say, unfortunately, I don't think we've hit the peak of that yet, and there is still some more to come.
You mentioned transport. It was up 12% in the figures out today. That obviously affects producers as well. Does the government need to extend the fuel excise relief? Is that something you're pushing for?
No, we're not. It is a difficult issue for the government, but I am conscious that they do need to get the budget under control. I think with the inflation coming through today, we need the government to focus on cost of living measures that are targeted at the vulnerable within our community. There are a lot of people well placed after the pandemic to be able to deal with some of this inflation. However, it's those vulnerable segments that we really need to target so that we're not putting the budget into a more difficult situation.
So how are we seeing consumers responding to and reacting to the high prices that we're seeing in the shops? Are we seeing a move towards farmers markets, for example, away from the retail shops? How are people coping with it?
At the moment, we're not seeing too much of an impact. If we look overseas, there have been some situations where consumers have started to trend down to lower value products. I mean, consumers do have a lot of choice. One of the great things about the food and grocery sector is there is a high degree of competition, lots of different products and brands, and lots of substitutability between products. So we encourage consumers to shop around and also to realise that some products like frozen and tinned are really great options when you're seeing the significant increases in some of the fresh products.
Is there any relief in the near sight on some of these fronts, do you think? You mentioned that it's going to keep going up before it goes down. I mentioned in the introduction, some experts are predicting we're looking at about 18 months of rising prices. What's your understanding of just how long we can expect this to continue?
I think it is going to persist for some time, and I'd agree around 18 months could be the time period before we get back down around the 2 to 3% band. And that's because there are 3 main drivers of the inflation. They're the COVID pandemic, the Ukrainian war, and then also some of the weather events that we've had here, as well as droughts around other parts of the world. There is still a lot of uncertainty around all of these factors. And so I think it is too early to tell whether we're at a peak, whether we're yet to reach that, and how long it's going to take to come down. But I think there is a lot of volatility, a lot of cost pressure. A lot of that is coming globally, and it does make it more difficult to be able to contain it in Australia.
Tanya Barden, appreciate your reaction to that set of figures out today. Thanks so much.
Thanks for your time.